Welcome back to another episode of the Biker PM. I'm your host, Anthony Pavelich. Today we continue our conversation with Tim Creasey. So if you haven't listened to the first part, you're missing out. Go back to your favorite podcast service, download it. So let's get started. Great. Yeah, great. I do want us to move us on to the ADKAR, just because I want to make sure we have enough time to explore ADKAR. ADKAR is an acronym. I will let you explain it. And it is a foundational part of ProSide, a part of change management. I think I've told you this before. My husband is into change management. So he's done the ProSci certification. So I have ADKAR stuff all around the house.
Right.
So let's go ahead and jump into that. So give us a little bit about what is ADKAR.
Very good. So ADKAR is ProSci's individual change model, describes the foundational building blocks of a successful individual change, whether it's happening at home, in a community group, or at work. Now, if we take one step back, this is built on this whole premise that organizational change happens one person at a time, and that successful organizational outcomes. Vince Lombardi, who is the legendary football coach of the Green Bay Packers, said the achievement of the organization is the result of the successful achievement of each individual. Right. So if we're going to roll out a system and 5 people are going to use it, the system will be as successful as those 5 people are at bringing the system to life and how they do their jobs. So that's that individual universal common denominator. So then ADKAR gives us those building blocks. How do I help somebody through a change? I'll give you each of the 5 and then we'll kind of go through them. So the first A is awareness of the need for change. Notice that it's not awareness that the change is happening, it's awareness of the need for change. Subtle but very important distinction. The second is desire to participate and support the change. The personal decision, since we all have free will, to get on board and make the change. So that's when I've taken the decision to step out of the current and step into the transition. The K is knowledge, knowing what to do, knowing how to bring the change to life. Knowledge is necessary, but not sufficient. And it's also our default knee-jerk reaction. If we want somebody to make a change, what do? We train them about it.
Yeah.
We give them the checklist. But knowledge without foundational awareness and desire is not going to bring about that change.
I was going to say, I think desire is one of the hardest things I think to get from people, because especially when a lot of them are change adverse, or they're afraid of change. They don't understand change. I'll let you continue, but desire, I think, is like.
Let's circle back on that one for sure, right?
Yeah.
When I get to the R, because I think it's an interesting piece. It's a fun place to start to jump into. So K is that knowledge on how to do it. A is the ability to implement the required skills and behaviors. So ability is where the change has happened. I can now log into the system. I can now do that new sales pitch. Whatever the change was required of me as a contributor to this organization, I have the ability to implement those skills and behaviors. And then I always make the joke that ProSci would be a complete failure if Jeff Hyatt would have invented the ADKAR model, ADKA, right? Because all too often, that's how we try to do change. Awareness, desire, knowledge, ability. Actually, we just try knowledge, but the R at the end is reinforcement to sustain the change, because we know it's our natural, psychological, physiological reaction to go back to how things were. And so without reinforcement, the change won't stick. So awareness, if I have awareness, I'd say I understand why. If I have sufficient desire, I'd say I've decided to. If I have sufficient knowledge, I'd say I know how to, I am able to, and I'll continue to. And so if we can help a person get to those I statements, they will be able to navigate this change journey more effectively. Now, let's jump right to your point, because I've presented the ADKAR model to I don't even know how many thousands of people from stages, right? And I'll often use this interactive polling software, and I'll ask the question, which of the 5 ADKAR building blocks do you think is going to be the most challenging in times of change? And then I'll step to the front of the stage and cover my eyes. And I'll say, I'll bet you I can guess what numbers show up on that screen. 65 to 70% pick desire every time, like you had alluded to, right, Anthony? Because it is ultimately that personal decision. There is so much behind, what are the motivators for me personally? What are the motivators for me within the organization? What's my personal context? What's my personal history? How do I see myself here? What's in it for me in the end? That desire is a very personally loaded one. About 10%, 15% will do reinforcement, because we realize things are moving so fast. We tend not to pay attention there. About 10% will do awareness. And then you get 5 and 3% knowledge and ability. So desire is the one we gravitate towards being the most difficult, because it is that individual decision. If I look into my research though, and I ask what's the number one reason we found resistance to change, it's that nobody made a compelling case for the reason for change. It's actually awareness of the reasons, awareness of the need for change that we find is the root cause of the most resistance. And I think this is an interesting emergence. It comes about from the new value systems that organizations are holding. That if we are in one of those command and control, predictable, maybe an older value system, when I ask you to jump, your answer is, how
Why?
high, right?
Yeah.
How
Now it would be in the old way. Yeah,
yeah,
it'd be like how high,
right. My
when.
grandfather's
Yeah.
GE, right, where he started and
Yeah.
retired, his answer was how high. This new value system, though, of empowerment, accountability, ownership, the kind of organizations we're trying to build, you're exactly right. If I've gotten you to this point where you really feel like you're an accountable, really engaged part of the organization, and I ask you to jump, your very first question is, why? You told me I owned this. You told me this was,
Yeah.
and so that notion and the question why starts when we're 2 years old, right?
Oh,
Answering
trust me.
why is not different. Yeah.
As a kid, I got in trouble so many times for asking why. So I switched it to how come a couple of times to see if that made a difference, and
To see if it tried.
It didn't work.
Well, I love how
trouble.
we elevate that notion of 5 whys. I'm sure you've used
Oh,
the
yeah.
5 whys in your work.
A lot.
We were elevated as this huge, strategic. And I'm like, no, my 2-year-old figured that stuff out the minute he turned 2, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, like every 2-year-old invented the 5 whys. But now we have organizations that are emboldening and really bringing that value to life. And when you are in an empowered organization, why is that very first question? So awareness, desire, knowledgeability, reinforcement. Desire feels like the trickiest because it's personal decision. Knowledge is our knee-jerk reaction. Awareness is where we find most resistance. And then reinforcement's that one that we can often forget.
So what I find interesting about this is, yes, ADKAR is a great model and we can apply it, especially in business situations and organizations. How would you think an entrepreneur, somebody who works by themselves, can ensure that, okay, I know I need to make this change. I'm going to make this change. They're not, a lot of times they may have to educate themselves so that knowledge is like, okay, I have to train myself how to do this. And then, then they're able to do it. But then that reinforcement, I think, because entrepreneurs get really busy, so they may have come up with this great new process to do things. And I know I've fallen into this because I've gone through, as an entrepreneur, times where I use every morning, I'd sit down, I would do, this is my plan for the day. These are my goals for the day. Then it gets to a point where you end up being busy and you're like, okay, I'm just going to try to wing it, and do this. So that reinforcement for entrepreneurs can probably be the hardest, I would think, because they're their own boss. They're doing this for them. So the ADKA, is probably the more desirable part of them to work on. And then it's that reinforcement, because you're doing everything yourself sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you highlight an interesting and important aspect of ADKAR about how individual it is. It is an individual change model. So when we go support an organization with 150,000 people, it's really around how do you build the plans to help scale what is ultimately an individual change model. So you get to that notion of reinforcement. If I'm a sole proprietor, I need to be really thoughtful around what are the mechanisms, the systems, the measures that are going to keep me motivated to stay, with this change that I just created. So for some of us, it might be a real visual scoreboard, right, that we put up on our whiteboard. And each day we hold ourselves accountable to giving ourselves a score of 1 through 5 on how well we adhered to our new process we invented. And so over time we get to see, but it's, for some of us, it might be that visual thing. Some of us, it might be a rubber band around our wrist. And each time we start down that path of the old way, the ad hoc way, we snap ourselves right there. There's a lot of creative ways that I think we can get into this notion of personally, how would I reinforce my own personal change I'm trying to make? But what I think is interesting, Anthony, is that we're now thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
From the beginning, as you've built out that new process, you've asked yourself, And I've been doing some fun work with ADKAR and Kurt Lewin's force field analysis, right? So Kurt Lewin gives us the idea of force fields, where if a change is set in at the middle of the table, you have restraining forces from one side of the table pushed on it. And those restraining forces are trying to keep the change in place. And on the other side, you have driving forces that are trying to push that change forward. And so Lewin tells us if we can better understand the restraining forces and driving forces, we can ultimately figure out how to get this change moving if we can reduce restraining or increase driving forces. And so we've taken ADKAR and started to put it into this frame a little bit. And I introduced this notion, if awareness is I understand why, as an individual, having contemplated the change I'm trying to make, I could ask myself, what is it that's keeping me from saying I understand why? And what do I need to be able to say I understand why? And again, this is pretty introspective, right? Like that sole proprietor who came up with that solution, but take that notion of reinforcement. What is it that's keeping me from saying I'm going to keep doing this? And what would I need? What would be valuable to me? What would help me get to the point to say, I'm going to keep doing this?
Do you feel overwhelmed, overstimulated, and overworked? There's so much you need to do, but you don't know what the best way to do it is? And you're not sure where all your time goes each week? Jump on over to my website, pavproconsulting.com. You can download my free PDF, The 5 Proven Strategies to Steal Back Lost Time and Money in Your Business. And while you're there, you can book a free process discovery session. pavproconsulting.com. Move forward with confidence, focus, and productivity. Tim, you said it's very interesting because when we go back to what we were just talking about with the ADKAR, that we're thinking about it as entrepreneurs, so that reinforcement becomes more a really personal thing of how am I going to do it. It does actually, if you think of an entrepreneur using this and taking down this acronym and writing out, okay, this is, the awareness, this is my desire, this is what I have to do to gain the knowledge, this is then what I have to do to gain the ability, and then actually just plan, how am I going to reinforce myself? Instead of just going into a process, but having that plan in place, like you said, make a visual, this is what I'm going to do, kind of makes it more, solidifies that reinforcement, not only after they get there, but beforehand, because they're like, I know this is what will keep me motivated. It's just Absolutely. Like if somebody wants to work out every day, they want, what's going to keep them motivated is getting that X on the calendar every day that, yes, I accomplished my goals for this day. So how are they going to do that? But then also figure out a way to help their clients do the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that, I have a son with an Apple Watch who's all about closing those rings, right? That's he gets that bit of reinforcement. And I think, taking change and breaking it into these blocks, that's what the goal is with ADKAR. And I'll talk about, can you write an email? Think about how you'd write an email with and without ADKAR. Mm-hmm. Without ADKAR, the email might say, file your new TPS report on Friday. For any of our Office Space fans, you got those TPS reports. Now think about writing a short 5-sentence email about the new TPS report, but from an ADKAR perspective. If awareness is why, as we're having challenges with our data integrity, a desire. You're going to have an easier time at it if you can step into this new TPS system we're going to release. Knowledge. As you remember, here's what the new form looks like. You can take a change and start to break it into, why now, what if we don't? What's in it for me? What do I need to know? What do I need to be able to do? And why should I keep doing it? And those are it's those building blocks, right?
I'm working with a client right now that we had a meeting this week, and they have a hard time, part of their problem is, planning, and they, tracking how long the project's going to take us. And they don't want to go into that. It's a large organization. It's a nonprofit, but they don't want to go into everybody tracking their time. So trying to figure out what resources are available to work on projects. And it's kind of what I started talking to them about is, instead of saying, okay, you have to track your time, start talking to them like, we need to do this, but how do we know that we have the people? How, to kind of pull them into yeah, we do need to figure out a way to know who's busy and who's not, instead of like pushing it out there, but like getting them to start thinking themselves like, yeah, we do need to have a better way of knowing who's spending 60% of their time in operations and only has 40% available for projects. And so having them come up with the idea basically rather than pushing out that this is the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've highlighted a neat connection, because participatory design, getting people engaged in to help
Mhm.
identify what are the problems, what are some solution alternatives.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that going on right now, is how do we get our people more engaged in solution design? What you just did, though, is showed us how that connects to ADKAR. Because
Yeah.
if you help me get involved in identifying the problems and coming up with the solutions, you're helping me internalize awareness and desire as I'm helping you build a solution. Now,
Yeah.
that's not going to be enough for the change to happen,
No.
right? And there's some of these buzzes in the change management discipline, like if we just make our solutions intuitive enough, we don't need any change. We don't need to help people adopt them. Or if we just involve people in solution design, then we don't need to apply change management to drive adoption and usage. And those are certainly short-sighted, right? Because if is intuitive better than not? Absolutely. But is it enough to get sufficient adoption and usage? No, not quite. But in the same way, right? Is getting people engaged in identifying problems and creating solutions, is that better than not? Absolutely.
Mhm.
It preloads awareness and desire, but we
Yeah.
still need to be thoughtful then when the solution comes to life. How are we going to help people really, really bring it to life?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're getting close to our time. So I think this conversation has been great for the listeners, for the entrepreneurs to understand, like, especially, that blank sheet exercise and making the decisions on what am I working on? What am I going to do? What changes can I make? And the changes that I want to make, do they make sense to make? As well as in this ADKAR process is just going to be, I think, hopefully changing, for their business, help them, grow. But
Fantastic. And,
I,
and my hope is to make this, I mean, we don't need PhDs in
no,
organizational psychology, right, to bring this to life. A lot of this is patterning and common sense applied more commonly, because too
well,
often it's not getting applied, right?
yeah. And it's just the same thing when I talk about project management too. It's like, you don't think you run projects, but you do. And I think you and I talked about this on our previous call. It's like everything you can relate everything to project management, just like you can relate a lot of common things you do to change management. Just having the process in front of you and having it spelled out to where you can relate it to what you do makes sense. And then it's like, oh, I can do this.
Absolutely.
What I usually ask people at the end, and
Okay.
how is, but we're not talking about you as an entrepreneur, but let me ask you, what was the one thing that drove you to be a change management expert?
Yeah. Okay.
But
Perfect.
I mean, was there something that happened? Was it you, or just what drove you to this?
Yeah, I think the way I got to ProSci was right out of college. Right out of undergrad, I had to find something to do, because about a year, my partner was getting a teaching licensure, so it was going to take her longer than me to get out of school. And I was all lined up to go do a PhD in comparative economics, and start teaching economics. That was the plan. Um, so I landed this 3-month gig at ProSci. And what I found was what I call microeconomics. If macroeconomics describes how the large, the country's economy works, and micro is how a firm makes decisions, ultimately how a person decides what they do is that kind of microeconomics. And that's really what ProSci has aimed to study and help organizations do better, is to help people through those changes we've asked them to take on at that micro level. What gets me up every morning is that this discipline, the better we treat our people in times of change, it drives better project outcomes, it drives organizational outcomes,
Yeah.
and it positions our people to succeed. And I think that's really important, that treating our people the right way in times of change is not just better for them, it's better for the organization and the initiatives. And Peter Drucker, Jim Collins talks about Peter Drucker's probing question as, how do we become more humane and more productive at the same time? Because I can achieve one at the expense of the other all day long, but how do I achieve both? And so that's really got what keeps me going in this discipline of change management, that if I can help people through ADKAR, I know I'm more productive. I know by the data, my projects are more likely to finish on time, on budget, meet objectives, be less risky. And I know that's the right way to treat and support Andy or Becky or Charlie or Debbie, the individuals who are going through change. And so that's what keeps me going, is that it's not just about driving more successful change outcomes. It's about helping people through their day-to-day experience in their organizations.
And the better the people are treated, the more productive they're going to be, the more helpful they're going to be. And it's going to help, not only, it's going to improve your projects and your changes even more, because they know that you care about them.
And just like we can create a track record, organizational scar tissue and memory around poorly led change, we can also create an organizational legacy around effectively leading change and effectively empowering our people to succeed in change. And that's really where we spend our time with our clients and our customers.
Exactly. So if people want to find out more, give us the website. How do they get a hold of you? How do they get a hold of ProSci?
Very good. So I'm on LinkedIn, Tim Creasey, and we'll put a link in the show notes.
Yep,
ProSci.com, PROSCI.com is the main website, where you'll find all of those free resources, as well as information about our solutions for individuals and our solutions for organizations. The other place I'd point you to is YouTube. The ProSci YouTube station has really gotten some legs in the last couple of years. There's a whole series of what we call Tim Talks, which are fun little 5-minute videos where people ask me questions about change.
Awesome.
And then a whole bunch of 1.5 to 3-minute little snippets, just to help people really expand their understanding of change and moving parts so that they can be more effective.
Perfect. I'll put like you said, all those links will actually be in the show notes. And thank you for your time, Tim. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. Really appreciate it. And helping people unlock the challenges of change is what we're here for. And so hopefully some of your listeners picked up a nugget or a turn of phrase here or there that might help them.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Biker PM. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you think. And remember, if you're an entrepreneur that wants to be with like-minded individuals and improving their project management skills, join the Biker PM Facebook group and watch out for some exciting news coming soon. Until next time.